Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have a new life story. Let's begin.
My name is Allison Moore, and if you're reading this, you already know the ending. Or at least, the kind of ending I was handed. There are so many ways to start a story like mine, but I keep coming back to that moment in the lawyer's office, when the truth finally crashed over me. After all these years, all the resilience and all the sacrifice, I wasn't even considered family where it counted most. But that's not where it really begins. If you want to understand why losing everything felt like drowning in air, you have to start with the years I spent learning to breathe underwater. I was 8 when my world stopped making sense. I remember the smell of my mother's perfume, clean, citrusy, the scent that still sometimes drifts through my dreams, and the sound of my father's laugh, big and rumbling like it came from somewhere deeper than his chest. We lived in a house with more windows than doors, overlooking a pond in rural Connecticut, where fall arrived in a rush of red and gold. My parents were not wealthy, but they were careful. Every dollar had a place, and every future plan was mapped out. There was a college fund in my name, a safe in the closet for emergencies, and a will that named me as their whole world. It ended quickly. A car accident took my mother. Then, barely 8 weeks later, my father's body gave up in a hospital bed, ravaged by an illness I didn't understand. The state tried to find a relative, but there were none close enough or willing, so I landed with my mother's best friend, Patricia Harper, a woman who, at the time, seemed almost mythic to me. She lived in a house twice the size of ours, all white clapboard and climbing roses, with her own daughter, Julia, a quiet, serious girl a year younger than me. Patricia never pretended that Julia and I were the same, but for a while, she pretended we were equals. She enrolled me in the same schools, put our names on every holiday card, introduced us as her girls. We shared a bedroom lined with built-in bookshelves, and Julia taught me how to French braid my hair. I still remember the night we decided to become forever sisters, pricking our fingers with sewing pins and mixing a drop of blood, giggling at the strange power of ritual. I didn't understand then the thousand little ways love could be measured or withheld or rationed out in teaspoons rather than bowls, but I felt it as childhood shifted into adolescence. When Julia got sick, an autoimmune condition that sapped her energy and sent her in and out of doctor's offices, the center of gravity in the house shifted so quietly I didn't notice it at first. It started with the little things. Julia got the biggest room when we moved. I got the one with the leaky window. Julia got out of chores. I picked up the slack. "You're so mature for your age, Allison," Patricia would say as I folded laundry or emptied the dishwasher. "Julia needs you to be strong." I became an expert at strong. I did my homework at the kitchen counter after clearing dinner, got a job shelving books at the library the day I turned 14, and quietly stopped asking for new clothes when I realized Julia always needed more. When she turned 16 and got her license, Patricia bought her a used Honda and paid for driving lessons. "It's important for her to feel independent," she explained. My own 16th birthday came and went, with a card and a $20 bill slipped into my palm. "We're so proud of you for managing on your own," Patricia said, as if independence was a badge to be earned through deprivation. School became my sanctuary. I lost myself in advanced classes, racking up A's and teacher recommendations, all the while working 30 hours a week at the bookstore downtown to pay for what Patricia called extras. SAT prep courses, application fees, even my own prom dress. Julia, always delicate, was enrolled in a private therapy program with bills that seemed to arrive weekly. Patricia explained it all. "We do what we must for the ones who need us most. You're so good at taking care of yourself, Allison. I wish Julia had half your backbone." I believed her. I wanted to. I thought maybe If I kept working, kept giving, kept earning my place, one day I would feel like I really belonged. Instead, life just kept taking. Brown University was supposed to be my rebirth, but it turned out to be a test of endurance, a slow, relentless climb against a slope steeper than anyone else seemed to face. Providence was cold, the kind of cold that crept into your bones and made even the smallest dorm room feel cavernous and unwelcoming at night. I moved in with two girls from Boston, both of whom had parents who bought them matching comforter sets and meal plans. I unpacked my suitcase full of thrift store finds and clipped a single photo of my old house to the cinder block wall, the only anchor I allowed myself to the life I'd left behind. My scholarships covered tuition, barely. For everything else, housing, books, food, I was on my own. I worked two jobs my entire freshman year, mornings as a campus tour guide, evenings behind the counter at a downtown coffee shop. My hands were always sticky with the scent of burnt espresso. My knuckles were raw from cleaning the shop's ancient espresso machine. At night, I studied until my eyes ached, convinced that if I simply tried hard enough, the world would eventually notice. Sometimes I caught myself glancing at Julia's Instagram. Her photos all soft pastels, studio lighting, the faint halo of golden hour sun, each post a small shrine to a life I was no longer part of. She called sometimes, usually on Sundays, and told me about her new art classes, the gallery show her therapist had arranged, the studio apartment in Williamsburg that Patricia was helping her afford. I wanted to resent her, but the truth was more complicated. Julia sounded lonely, anxious, as if her whole identity had been built around the gentle pressure of someone else's care. "I wish I was as independent as you," she'd say. "You're so brave, Allie." Every compliment was a reminder that my independence was just another word for being left alone. The years blurred together, broken up only by holidays and the occasional panic attack over money. Patricia sent care packages on Thanksgiving and Christmas. Always the same: a check for $50, a polite note, a coupon for the store that never quite covered what I needed. I could never bring myself to ask for more. Every time I visited home, the house felt smaller, tighter, as if my place in it had shrunk a little further. Patricia asked about my grades, my friends, whether I was seeing anyone. Always careful, never quite warm. Julia was the one who got the lingering hugs, the "I'm so proud of you" speeches at the dinner table. By the end of sophomore year, I was deep in debt. My federal loans had maxed out, my part-time jobs barely covered the cost of living, and the emergency college fund Patricia once promised was officially gone. When I confronted her, the conversation was brisk and non-sentimental. "Allison, I told you before, the medical bills, the house repairs, Julia's therapy, I had to use what was there. It wasn't an easy decision." I said, "It was my fund. Mom and Dad set it up for me." She looked away. "I know this hurts, but I had to make choices for the family. You're smart. You'll figure it out." There was nothing to do but nod, bite my tongue, and keep moving. I added another job to my schedule, editing papers for wealthy undergraduates who paid cash for feedback that was really just me rewriting their essays at 3 in the morning. I stopped calling home except for holidays, and even then, it felt like dialing a number that no longer belonged to me. Julia, meanwhile, thrived in her softly lit world. She sold a painting for $1,200 her junior year, held a small show in Brooklyn that Patricia flew out to attend. The two of them posted smiling photos outside galleries, captioned with inside jokes and hashtags. I watched from a distance, equal parts envious and ashamed for feeling it. I kept telling myself that family was about love, not money, that if I just worked harder, kept quiet, one day I'd be the kind of daughter someone wanted to claim. Graduation came and went. No one from My family attended the ceremony. I celebrated with friends, spent the evening drinking cheap champagne on a rooftop and watching the sun set over Providence, feeling both liberated and unmoored. I had done it. I had survived. Now all that was left was to make it matter. But the world after college was not built for people like me, people whose only safety net was the stubborn refusal to give up. I moved to Boston and took the first job I could find as an editorial assistant at a mid-sized publishing house. The pay was meager, but I told myself it was a foot in the door. My apartment was a cramped studio over a pizza shop in Allston. The floors slanted, the windows rattled when it rained, and the heating barely worked. Most days I ate peanut butter sandwiches and instant noodles, trying to stretch my paycheck until the next one arrived. Patricia called once, the summer after I started working, to ask if I could help Julia move some of her paintings to a new gallery. I drove to New York, spent the weekend hauling canvases up and down 6 flights of stairs, then took the bus back to Boston with a $20 bill pressed into my palm and a perfunctory thank you text from Julia. That was the last time I visited her. The next year, Patricia's health began to fail. She was always tired, always coughing, her hands shaking when she tried to sign checks. Julia called more often, her voice small and frightened. "I think she's getting worse, Allie. I don't know what to do." I wanted to say, "You have to figure it out now just like I did," but I swallowed it. The truth was, for all my anger, I still couldn't let go of the idea that family meant something. I took time off work, spent weekends back in Connecticut, cooking meals, cleaning the house, running errands while Julia coordinated from afar. Patricia died on a rainy morning in April. Julie and I sat together in the hospital waiting room, silent and numb, 2 women bound by something that felt less like sisterhood and more like shared damage. The funeral was small, a handful of neighbors and old friends, no relatives to speak of. Afterward, we walked the garden paths behind the house. The hydrangeas were already starting to bloom. I thought, for a moment, that maybe this could be the turning point, the moment when we started over, just the 2 of us. I was wrong. The day the lawyer called, I had just finished a 12-hour day at work, my hands still stained with ink and coffee, my head full of deadlines. He said, "We need you to come to Fairfield to discuss your mother's estate." His tone was distant, but not unkind. I took the train, watching the Connecticut countryside blur past, every mile a reminder of how much I'd given up to get here. The meeting was brief, the will was clear. Julia was the sole beneficiary. The house, the land, the insurance, the remaining savings, over $2 million in total, counting the last appraisal, would all pass directly to her. I was not even named. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I simply gathered my things and left, the lawyer's final words echoing in my head. "I'm sorry. I wish there was more I could do." Outside, the sky was gray and the air thick with the promise of rain. I stood on the steps of the law office and tried to imagine a version of my life where this didn't feel like the end of something irreplaceable. I called Julia, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. She answered on the second ring. "I'm so sorry, Allie," she said, as if reading a script. "I didn't know she'd do that. I thought she'd split it." I said, "Of course you did. Of course you did." I hung up before she could answer. That night, I walked the empty streets of Boston, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every unspoken promise, every time I'd told myself that love was enough. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if maybe I was wrong. If you've ever found yourself cut out of the very story you built your life around, maybe you understand. Or maybe you're luckier than I was. Either way, stay with me, because losing everything was only the beginning. I wish I could tell you there was some dramatic confrontation after the will was read, a family fight that split open the truth, a cathartic screaming match where decades of resentment came tumbling out. But the truth was far less cinematic. Julia and I hardly spoke at all. In the days after the funeral, she moved through the old house in a trance, packing her art supplies, meeting with realtors, taking calls about the estate. I lingered in my rented apartment in Boston, waiting for the phone to ring, half hoping for an apology, half fearing some new humiliation. Instead, there was only silence and bills. I kept working because what else do you do when your world has been narrowed to the width of your bank statement? Every morning, I joined the silent river of commuters moving down Commonwealth Avenue, clutching my travel mug of burnt coffee and calculating how much longer I could keep up the charade of normalcy. My student loan balance sat like a black hole at the bottom of every monthly statement. $142,000 plus interest. My paychecks vanished almost as quickly as they arrived, divided between rent, utilities, groceries, and the never-ending cascade of small emergencies that came with living alone in an old building. Sometimes, late at night, I would scroll through the online listings for apartments in Fairfield County, Connecticut, tiny one-bedrooms renting for 3 times my salary, glossy photos of spaces I'd never afford. I found myself, absurdly, checking the listing for Patricia's house. Pending sale. The asking price? $1.95 million. I calculated, for the 100th time, how much that money could have changed my life, paid off my debts, given me a fresh start, maybe allowed me to help someone else for once. I kept expecting the grief to fade, but it didn't. It lingered in small, embarrassing ways, forgetting my lunch at home, snapping at coworkers, crying over dog food commercials. I avoided calls from Julia, let her voicemails pile up, unread and unanswered. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't sound like begging. It was around this time that I started seeing a therapist. The first session was awkward, the air in the tiny office thick with the smell of herbal tea and unshed tears. I tried to explain what had happened, how I had grown up believing I was part of a family, only to discover I was just a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Dr. Bernard listened quietly, her eyes kind but unblinking. She said, "It sounds like you spent your whole life proving your worth to people who already decided you weren't entitled to anything. That's not your failure, Allison. That's theirs." It was the first time anyone had said it so plainly, and I found myself sobbing, the sound ugly and unfiltered. When I left her office that night, I felt lighter, but also more raw. I wasn't sure if knowing the truth would help or just make the pain harder to bear. The months passed in a blur of monotony. I took on more freelance editing, correcting college admissions essays for the children of people with last names that matched Boston's oldest streets. My boss at the publishing house, a woman named Miranda, noticed I was working late and started assigning me the most tedious manuscripts: diet books, ghost-written memoirs, real estate guides. The work was dull, but steady. I told myself it was temporary, that soon I'd catch a break. But breaks, in my world, were just more cracks in the foundation. My car broke down on a Friday evening in March, stranded me in a gas station parking lot on the edge of Dorchester. The tow truck driver, a man with tired eyes and an even more tired engine, charged me $240 cash to haul it 3 miles to a mechanic. I didn't have the money, so I used my credit card, pushing the balance past my comfort zone. The mechanic called the next day. Transmissions shot, $3,100 minimum. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I sold my mother's gold locket on eBay for $700, paid off as much of the car repair as I could, and started taking the bus to work. All the while, Julia's life seemed untouched by chaos. She moved into a newly renovated apartment in Greenwich, posted photos of her art hanging in a chic gallery, tagged with words like #blessed and #gratitude. She emailed me once, a short note. "I know things have been hard, but I hope you're okay. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." I deleted it without replying. Spring came, but it didn't bring renewal. The publishing house announced layoffs. I was spared, but only because I was the lowest paid assistant on the staff. Everyone above me got severance. I got a heavier workload and a warning that we're all lucky to have jobs at all. My savings evaporated. Rent crept up again. I moved into a smaller studio, the kind where you could stand in the shower and reach the fridge at the same time. My friends invited me out less, tired of hearing, "I can't afford it." When I did see them, I lied about how well things were going. One night, in the thick heat of July, I finally broke. I sat on the linoleum floor of my kitchen, surrounded by bills and job rejection emails, and let myself feel the full weight of my loss. I cried for everything: the house, my childhood, the money, the years I'd spent believing that if I was just good enough, strong enough, I'd be given my fair share. I cried for my parents, whose careful planning and small dreams had been erased with a few legal signatures. I cried for the sister I loved who had become a stranger, insulated by wealth I'd helped create. It was then, in the lowest moment, that I found the letter. It had been tucked into the back of a folder full of old documents from my Brown days, a plain white envelope with my name written in Patricia's careful handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but something in me, stubborn and aching, needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. The letter was short, apologetic, full of half explanations and evasions. "I did what I thought was best for both of you. Julia will always need more than you. You have always found a way." There was no confession, no promise of restitution, just the same old refrain: be strong, be grateful, survive. Enclosed with the letter were copies of old legal documents: the trust funds, the house deed, the life insurance policy. I pored over them for hours, following the paper trail of every dollar that had been siphoned away. I discovered that my college fund had been emptied when I was 17, its contents funneled into an account managed solely by Patricia. The insurance payout from my father's death, $250,000, had been used to pay off the mortgage and cover Julia's medical bills. There were signatures on every page, all in Patricia's hand. For the first time, I considered calling a lawyer. I took the documents to a legal clinic run by the local university. The attorney, a kind woman with streaks of gray in her hair, listened as I explained the history, showed her the paperwork, and asked if there was anything to be done. She read everything carefully, then looked at me with real regret. She said, "You were a minor. Patricia was your legal guardian, not your adoptive mother. She had broad discretion over the funds. It's not right, but it's legal. I'm sorry, Allison. I wish there was something more I could do." I thanked her, numb. Even the law, it seemed, was on the side of those who could write the rules. That night, I decided that if there was no justice coming for me, then survival would have to be enough. I started making new plans, small ones at first: open a new savings account, take a free online course in editing, look for second jobs. I set up a spreadsheet, tracked every cent, made a budget that allowed for coffee once a week and nothing else. I gave myself permission to let go of the fantasy that Julia or anyone else would ever make things right. I walked through the city in the early mornings before work, letting the light break over the Charles River and thinking about all the versions of myself that had died along the way. I let myself grieve. Then, slowly, I let myself begin again. I didn't have a house. I didn't have a family. I didn't even have my old name, really. Just the memories of a time when I'd believed in sisterhood and safety. But I was still here, stubborn and breathing, alive in a world that had no use for strong women who didn't ask for anything. Maybe that, I thought, was enough of a start. It's a strange thing what you learn to live without. In the months after the legal doors closed for good, I trained myself not to flinch at each reminder of what I'd lost. I quit checking the Fairfield County real estate listings. I deleted the photo of Patricia's house from my phone. I stopped saving the little cards that came in the mail each Christmas, signed, "With love, Mom and Julia," as if repetition alone could make the old stories true again. I told myself the past was dead weight, and if I wanted any future at all, I'd have to let it rot quietly behind me. And yet, starting over is never as clean as cutting a cord. Survival, at first, is not about finding meaning, it's about routine. I lived by numbers, calories, bus schedules, hours billed, dollars in my account. I set my alarm early enough to have the sidewalk to myself, walking the brick streets of Cambridge under a veil of half-light, repeating silent mantras of, "You are not weak, you will not ask." It was not optimism that carried me, but defiance. I told myself, if this is what you're given, you will make it yours. I worked. The publishing house kept me busy. Endless cycles of manuscript slush, corporate diet books, and romance novels that bled into each other in memory. At night, I tutored high schoolers in AP English, proofread resumes for neighbors, edited applications for international students hoping to make it into Ivy League schools. The money was never enough, but the feeling of control, however meager, was something I clung to with white knuckles. It was during this time that I met Rachel at a Friday night drop-in writing group, a thing I'd agreed to attend mostly for the promise of free cookies and hot coffee. Rachel was older than me, recently divorced, with a dry wit and a rolling, irreverent laugh that seemed to cut through any pretense. She was the first person in years to ask, point blank, "Why don't you ever talk about your family?" When I told her, in fits and starts, the mess of Patricia, Julia, the house, and the trust funds, she didn't look away or offer platitudes. She just listened, nodding, as if she'd known all along that people like us existed. Orphans in the world of the living, trained to never make demands. "You know," Rachel said, one night over cheap Thai food, "sometimes survival means learning to want again. It means deciding you deserve more than just air in your lungs." She handed me a crumpled napkin scrawled with a quote, "It's not weak to want. It's only weak to let that wanting make you small." I taped the napkin above my desk, and every morning I forced myself to read it. But wanting was complicated. The world around me was still sharp-edged, and nothing felt safe. At work, Miranda announced another round of layoffs, and I braced myself, feeling that familiar throb of anxiety. But this time, I fought for myself. I took every freelance project I could get, networked with the editors who liked my eye for detail, sent out resumes to every magazine within train distance of Boston. The hustle was exhausting, but beneath it I sensed a thin, growing wire of pride, something stubborn and unkillable that had nothing to do with being strong for anyone but myself. And then, in the middle of this self-imposed exile, Julia appeared again. It started with a letter, folded neatly in my mailbox. Her handwriting, fluent, looping, careful as ever, brought me back in an instant to the days when we would write notes and slip them under each other's doors. The letter was apologetic, almost painfully so. She wrote that she had sold Patricia's house, paid off all her own debts, and moved into a small apartment outside New Haven. She admitted she was overwhelmed by the estate, by the expectations everyone had always placed on her. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she wrote, "but I want to try to be your sister again, not in name, but in truth." I read the letter twice, then left it on the kitchen table. For a week, I avoided even looking at it, afraid of what I might say if I let myself answer. Forgiveness, for so long, had been a word I reserved for others, not for myself. But one night, alone in my tiny apartment with the wind howling against the old windows, I sat down and wrote back. I told her about the debts, the fear, the hollowed out years of working for scraps and swallowing every need. I didn't sugarcoat the anger or the sense of betrayal, but I wrote too about survival, that I was not destroyed, that the worst thing that happened to me was not being left out of a will, but believing for too long that I deserved it. We wrote letters for months, tentative and stilted, like strangers practicing a language neither of us remembered. She told me about therapy, about dreams of going back to school for art therapy, about the sense that for the first time she was trying to be responsible for herself. I found myself wanting to believe her, as even another part of me recoiled, certain that this was just another loop in the endless cycle of forgiveness and pain. It wasn't until that December, over a year since Patricia's death, that Julia called me out of the blue. Her voice was softer, more hesitant than I remembered. She said, "I'm in Boston. There's something I need to tell you in person." I met her at a coffee shop on Tremont Street, the kind of place we would have loved as teenagers. Chalkboard menus, Christmas lights, indie music thrumming from a battered speaker. She was thinner than I remembered, older, her hair cropped short and streaked with gray. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, nothing to mark her as anyone other than another customer trying to get warm. We talked for nearly 2 hours about Patricia, about the house, about the years we'd spent orbiting each other in pain and silence. Her hands shook as she confessed that she'd found documents after the sale, bank records, letters, even the original terms of my parents' will. She said, "You were supposed to get half." She said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I think Patricia changed everything after you turned 18. I'm so sorry, Allie. I didn't know until it was too late." I wanted to believe her. I wanted it to be that simple, a villain, a victim, a clean line between guilt and innocence. But life, I'd learned, didn't work that way. I said, it doesn't matter anymore. More to myself than to her. There's nothing to be done. But Julia insisted on trying. She offered to give me a portion of the proceeds from the house sale. Enough, she said, to pay off my student loans, maybe put a down payment on a small place of my own. The sum was significant, over $250,000, but the gesture itself mattered more than the money. It was the first time anyone in my family had offered me something I hadn't had to fight for. For days, I agonized over whether to accept. Pride, stubbornness, and exhaustion battled inside me. I thought about all the times I'd said no out of fear that taking help would mean admitting defeat. I thought about Rachel's words. It's not weak to want. In the end, I said yes. I paid off the last of my student loans in a single transfer, the balance going from 6 figures to 0 in an instant. The weight I'd carried since I found a hollow lightness I didn't know how to fill. With what was left, I rented a small one-bedroom apartment in Somerville, with sunlight and real hardwood floors, and a lease with my name, only my name, on it. For the first time, I let myself want more than survival. I bought a new coat. I ordered takeout without guilt. I bought myself a secondhand bike, rode along the Charles River, letting the wind tangle my hair and the city blur beneath me. I started saving again, this time for me, with an account no one else could touch. Julia and I are not close. Maybe we never will be. But the bitterness has faded, replaced by something quieter, an understanding, maybe, that forgiveness is not about excusing what's been done, but allowing yourself to walk forward without dragging the past behind you. Some nights I sit on my fire escape and watch the city lights flicker, thinking about all the ways my life could have been different. But I no longer measure myself by what was taken or by the stories other people wrote for me. I am my own witness now. I am my own family. If you're still reading, maybe you know what it's like to build a life out of broken things. Or maybe you're just starting. Either way, I hope you find your way to want more, to claim what you deserve, not because someone gives you permission, but because you're finally ready to say yes.
For a long time, I thought forgiveness was something I owed to other people.
I thought if I just kept writing letters, if I said, I understand enough times, the ache in my chest would subside and I'd finally feel like the person everyone always wanted me to be. But the truth is, forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a process, sometimes an endless one, of letting go of the stories you were given and telling your own instead. That winter, with the last of my debts finally cleared and my name alone on a lease, I started seeing the world differently. Every small pleasure, waking up to sunlight in my own bedroom, eating breakfast at a table I'd picked out myself, the hush of the city before dawn felt like proof that I was no longer living someone else's script. I built new routines. On Sundays, I walked to the farmer's market with a thermos of coffee, just to browse and people watch. Sometimes I brought home fresh bread or a bunch of yellow tulips and arranged them in a chipped vase by my kitchen window. The ordinariness of it all was intoxicating. At work, things changed too. With my loans paid off, I felt a new lightness, a willingness to push back when clients or editors tried to take advantage. Miranda, noticing my newfound confidence, offered me the chance to take on a bigger project, a non-fiction book about women who rebuild their lives after loss. I threw myself into the research, interviewing everyone from divorcees to immigrants to women starting businesses after bankruptcy. Their stories, each unique, began to weave together in my mind, a tapestry of pain, resilience, and above all, agency. In the spring, Rachel convinced me to go to a reading at a small bookstore in Jamaica Plain. The featured author was a poet named Naomi, whose work I'd admired for years but never read aloud. I arrived early, sat near the back, and let the words wash over me. Lines about longing, about inheritance, and the stories our bodies carry, about the difference between surviving and living. Afterward, as Rachel chatted with the author, I browsed the stacks and ran into a man named Mark, a journalist working on a story about Boston's literary scene. We struck up an easy conversation about memoirs and the best coffee shops in Somerville. There was nothing flirtatious at first, just two people who understood the compulsion to turn pain into prose. We started seeing each other, slowly at first, both of us wary from old wounds. Mark was patient in a way that felt new to me. He didn't push for answers, didn't try to fix what wasn't his to fix. He listened, really listened, when I talked about Patricia, about Julia, about the years I'd spent proving my worth to people who never intended to see it. He shared his own failures, too. A messy divorce, a brother lost to addiction, a career that never went quite the way he had hoped. We made each other laugh, a lot, which surprised me more than anything. There were setbacks, of course. I still had days when the old narratives crept in, when I would catch myself comparing my life to Julia's, wondering if I'd ever feel enough. When Mark suggested we take a weekend trip to Cape Cod, I nearly said no, convinced that I was an imposter in the world of people who took vacations and planned for joy. But I said yes, and for 2 days we walked the windswept beaches and ate lobster rolls on splintered picnic tables and watched the sunset from a patch of dune grass. One night, sitting on the porch of our rented cottage, Mark asked me if I ever wanted to go back, to try to reclaim what had been lost. I thought about it. No, I said finally, not anymore. I used to believe that if I just worked harder, I could undo everything. But now, I think what I really needed was permission to start again. He smiled, and I realized he understood, because he had done it too. For the first time, I felt the possibility of loving someone, not as a way to fill the empty spaces, but as a way to celebrate what I had rebuilt from them. Julia's letters continued, less frequent but more honest. She wrote about struggles with depression, about art classes she was taking at a community college, about the guilt that still kept her up some nights. She wrote, I know I can never give back what was taken, but I want you to know I see you now. I know you deserved more. Her words no longer hurt. Instead, I found myself wishing her peace. By the end of summer, my book project was finished, a collection of narratives, essays, and interviews, all centered around women who had lost homes, families, fortunes, but found themselves. The publisher was impressed, and Miranda pushed for a wider release. For the launch party, Rachel insisted I buy a new dress, something bold and bright. I wore red for the first time in my adult life, stood in front of a small crowd, and read from my introduction. Strength is not the story of what we endure for others, but the claim we make on our own lives, even when no one is watching. Afterward, strangers approached to share their stories. Some whispered, some brash, all shaped by the desire to be seen. For the first time, I didn't shrink from their praise or look for ways to deflect it. I accepted it. I let it settle into my bones. A week later, Julia surprised me by showing up at my apartment. She looked nervous, holding a stack of sketches and a plastic container of lemon bars, our childhood favorite, something we hadn't shared since we were teenagers. We sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over the city, eating lemon bars and talking about the weather, about art and writing, about all the little things we had missed during years of silence. When the conversation turned to the past, we were both careful, gentle, honest, letting pauses stretch without shame. Finally, she said, "I'm sorry for everything, Allie. Not just for what was taken, but for the years I let you carry it alone." I nodded. "Yeah, I know. And I'm sorry for not telling you sooner how much it hurt." For the first time, the apology felt real. Not because it changed the past, but because it acknowledged it fully, without expectation of forgiveness. We sat quietly, letting the city grow dark around us, and I realized that this too was a kind of inheritance, a hard-won peace built on truth rather than obligation. Now, sometimes I catch myself looking forward. I think about what it means to want, not just to survive, but to reach for joy, for beauty, for love. I start to imagine a future not built on sacrifice, but on choice. If you are listening, if you are somewhere on your own journey of rebuilding, I hope you know this. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to write your own ending, no matter what stories came before. Autumn arrived in Boston with its usual drama, leaves burning bright against the gray sky, a chill that pressed through the gaps in every old window. I walked the city in my new red coat, learning again to be present, to notice the way dusk settled on the Charles, the laughter spilling from bars at twilight, the soft, contented hum of my own body, no longer coiled in anxiety. I was not rich, not in any way that would impress the world, but my debts were paid, my home was safe, and for the first time, I could imagine life stretching forward with possibility. The book's release changed my career in ways I never expected. Reviews appeared in online journals and local papers, praising its candor, its refusal to turn pain into spectacle or tragedy into easy triumph. Invitations began to arrive. Panels, podcasts, guest essays from magazines I'd only dreamed of writing for. Miranda offered me a promotion, senior editor, with the chance to shape the kind of books I wished I'd had when I was 20 and lost. I took the job with a mix of gratitude and quiet disbelief, and for a few weeks rode the strange high of feeling truly, visibly valued. Rachel celebrated every milestone as if it were her own. "You know what you should do?" she said over dinner one night at a little Italian place in the South End. "Take a real vacation. Not a weekend at the Cape, a week away. No work, no deadlines, no worrying about anyone else." She was right, of course, but the suggestion made me nervous. The part of me that survived by control, by planning every meal, counting every cent, rehearsing every possible disaster, was reluctant to let go. Mark, ever attuned to my quietest fears, didn't push. He just asked me where I'd go if there were no obstacles. Italy, I said, surprising myself. Florence. I always wanted to see the art, the light. It was a dream I'd barely allowed myself as a child, and never since. Mark smiled. Let's make it happen. 1 week, just us and the city. The anticipation of travel, the packing, the passport check, and the wild hope was as foreign to me as anything. But I booked the tickets, watched the days approach, and let myself be carried by the gentle momentum of trust. It was a week of firsts. First time seeing the Duomo at sunrise, the city's rooftops gold in the early light. First time tasting gelato in the street, sweet and cold against my tongue. First time letting a day unfold without planning every detail. Mark and I wandered museums and tiny bookstores, took trains into the hills, ate late dinners under string lights in courtyards crowded with locals. At night, in the small hotel room, we lay together with the window open, letting the city's night sounds lull us to sleep. It was the happiest I had ever been. And that, of course, was when the call came. It was Julia. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I need you, Allie. I'm in trouble. I'm messed up. Please call me back. I stood by the window, phone pressed to my ear, staring out at the Florentine skyline. My first impulse was the old one, to drop everything, to be the rescuer, the fixer, the strong one. But I hesitated. This was my life, my trip, my turn. Mark watched me quietly, waiting, trusting I would choose for myself. I texted Julia, I'm in Italy. I'll be back in 5 days. If it's urgent, call Rachel. For the first time, I set a boundary without apology or explanation. The feeling was terrifying and freeing. The next few days were tinged with worry, but also with clarity. I realized walking those ancient streets that I was allowed to be present in my own life, that loving someone didn't mean erasing myself to meet their needs. When I returned, rested and sun-kissed, I called Julia from Logan Airport. She answered on the first ring. She'd gotten into financial trouble, a series of bad investments that left her on the edge of losing her apartment. Old panic flared up, memories of my own years of instability, of sacrifices made for the weaker sibling. Julia asked if I could help, if I could lend her money from the inheritance she'd returned to me. I listened, I empathized, but I did not offer a solution. Julia, I love you, I said, steady now, but I can't fix this for you. I've spent too many years believing that saving you would save us both. I'll help you figure out a plan. I'll listen. But you have to take the lead. There was a long silence on the other end. I braced for anger, accusation, guilt. Instead, Julia began to cry, not the manipulative, desperate tears of our youth, but quiet, cleansing tears. Thank you for not rescuing me, she said at last. I think I need to figure out how to be strong for myself. It was, in its way, the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. Back in Boston, life returned to its rhythms, but nothing was quite the same. I found myself reaching for new goals, not out of desperation, but out of genuine desire. I started a writing group for women with similar stories, daughters cut out of wills, survivors of emotional neglect, women rebuilding after being made invisible. We met in libraries and cafes, sharing drafts and encouragement, rewriting the narratives that had been forced upon us. Mark and I grew closer, our relationship marked not by dependency, but by mutual respect. He asked me to move in with him that winter, and for the first time, I didn't hesitate out of fear of losing myself. I kept my apartment, my savings, my independence, but let myself lean into the warmth of partnership. We talked about the future, travel, work, maybe even marriage someday, not as a way to repair the past, but to build something honest and new. On the anniversary of my book's publication, I gave a talk at the Boston Public Library. Afterwards, a young woman approached me, her voice trembling as she thanked me for sharing my story. She thought I was the only one, she whispered. But now I see I can start over too. That night, as I walked home along the river, I felt the fullness of everything I had gained. Not money, not property, not a family restored, but the knowledge that I had rebuilt myself from the wreckage and emerged not just intact, but powerful. For so many years, I believed that survival meant shrinking, disappearing, making myself small so others could take what they needed. But now I know survival is just the first step. The rest is living, unapologetically, on your own terms. If you're still listening, if you're still fighting, know this: your life belongs to you. Every ending, every loss, every heartbreak can be a beginning if you let it. Winter in New England has a way of pressing old memories to the surface. Something about the hush of snow on brick, the way the world contracts to its smallest comforts, makes the past impossible to ignore. In those months, as the city stilled beneath sheets of ice, I felt something shifting inside me, a need to understand, not just what had happened, but how I had survived. I found myself sifting through old boxes for the first time in years. They were relics of every move: a shoebox of ticket stubs, faded photos of Julia and me in matching Halloween costumes, the last birthday card I ever received from my birth mother. There were journals from college, their margins crowded with tiny notes about rent, deadlines, the endless calculus of survival. As I turned the pages, I was struck by how little I'd allowed myself to feel back then, how carefully I'd built a wall around every wound, convinced that if I didn't name my losses, I could outrun them. But now, in the quiet warmth of my own living room, I let myself read every word. I let the pain in. And what surprised me was that it didn't break me, it softened me. I realized I wasn't mourning the loss of money or property, not really. What I'd grieved for all those years was the absence of recognition, the sense that my efforts, my loyalty, my love had been invisible, not just to others, but to myself. With that realization came another, quieter urge to help others like me claim their own stories. The writing group I'd started in the fall flourished and soon became something bigger. Women came from every corner of the city: single mothers, immigrants, estranged daughters, survivors of financial abuse. We shared our stories, sometimes through tears, sometimes through laughter, always with the kind of honesty that can only exist among people who have nothing left to lose. I started to see my story not as an outlier, but as a thread in a much larger tapestry of American girlhood, one shaped as much by erasure as by inheritance. Rachel urged me to submit an op-ed to the Globe about invisible daughters. I hesitated, fearing exposure, but wrote it anyway. The piece went viral. Letters poured in, women thanking me for giving voice to their experience, men asking how to be better fathers, college students writing to say they felt seen for the first time. There was pain in the responses, but also solidarity, a sense that even the loneliest wounds could knit together in community. Amid all this, Julia called again. This time her voice was steady, almost hopeful. "I've been offered a job," she said, breathless, "teaching art therapy at a women's shelter. It's not much, but it feels like a beginning." I congratulated her, genuinely happy. I told her, "It is a beginning, and you deserve it, Julia. Not because anyone gave it to you, but because you finally reached for it yourself." Our conversations became easier after that. The weight of old debts and betrayals faded, replaced by a tentative mutual respect. We no longer tried to repair what could not be fixed, but found ways to care for each other as we were. Two adults, both marked by loss, both still learning what it meant to belong. Then, one evening in late February, I received a letter from a lawyer in Fairfield County. Patricia's old house, the house of my childhood, was being sold again. The new owners wanted to convert it to a bed and breakfast. Would I, as a former resident, like to come and walk through it one last time as part of a historical preservation project? I stared at the invitation for days, unsure if I wanted to open those wounds. Mark encouraged me to go gently. He said, "Closure isn't always about the past. Sometimes it's about who you are now." On a gray morning, I took the train down the coast, watching the landscape blur from city to suburb to small town quiet. The house stood unchanged, a white colonial, slightly battered, its porch sagging under the weight of new snow. The inside was stripped of most of its memories, furniture gone, walls bare, the echo of footsteps in every empty room. But as I walked through each space, my old bedroom, the kitchen where Patricia lectured me about self-reliance, the backyard where Julia and I once promised to be forever sisters, I felt only gratitude. I was grateful for the girl who survived, for the woman who learned to want, for the part of me that refused to disappear even when the world insisted I should. I left a note in the foyer, a simple message tucked into a crack in the woodwork. She lived here. She mattered. She learned to begin again. Back in Boston, I felt a quiet release. I understood finally that home is not a place that can be taken from you. It is something you carry, built from the stories you choose to claim, the boundaries you draw, the dreams you let yourself follow. In the months that followed, I invested more in my community. I taught workshops on writing and financial literacy for women starting over. I mentored girls in the foster care system, telling them what I wished someone had told me at 16. Your life is not a debt you owe to anyone. You can want more than survival. You are allowed to belong to yourself. My relationship with Mark deepened into something neither of us had expected. We talked about building a future, perhaps a house together, perhaps a child. But there was no rush, no sense of lack. For once, every step forward felt like a choice, not a reaction. Julia visited that spring, bringing with her one of her paintings, an abstract landscape in wild, hopeful colors. "For your office," she said, smiling. A reminder that we both got out, that we both started again. I hung the painting where I could see it every morning, a small act of faith in the life I had built and the self I had become. If you are reading this and wondering if it's possible to heal after everything is taken from you, trust me, there is life beyond the loss. There are new stories waiting, built from the honesty of your scars and the stubbornness of your hope. Keep going. You will find your ending, and it will be your own. Spring in Boston always feels like a dare. Fragile crocuses pushing through frostbitten earth, sunlight breaking through the stubborn gray. I found myself breathing easier, noticing the world in colors I'd forgotten, the gold of Forsythia, the blue of the river at dawn, the red tulips at the market that I bought without thinking of the price. I had become, almost without noticing, someone who trusted herself to be happy. Not all the time, happiness was never simple, but in small, honest increments that made each day its own kind of victory. My work with the writing group grew into something larger, a nonprofit focused on storytelling and self-advocacy for young women aging out of the foster system. We met in libraries and community centers, women and girls in all stages of rebuilding, our sessions full of laughter, tears, and the kind of fierce honesty I once thought was dangerous. I watched as young women learned to name their experiences, to write and speak their truths, to negotiate for jobs and apartments and respect. Every milestone, every lease signed, every story published, every stubborn refusal to disappear felt like an answer to the years I'd been told to be the strong one so others could remain comfortable. One girl in particular, Mariah, reminded me of myself at 16. She was quick with a joke, guarded with her hopes, always first to volunteer and last to leave. Her file was thick with failed placements and suspensions, but her eyes were alive with possibility. She wrote about a childhood in shelters, about the humiliation of charity, about the rage and longing of never being chosen. "How did you stop being angry?" she asked me one afternoon after class, the room empty except for the two of us. I thought about the question, about Julia, Patricia, my own silent wars. "I didn't," I said. "I just learned to use it differently. Anger can eat you, or it can feed you. It's what you do with it that matters." She nodded, then handed me a battered notebook, asking if I would read her latest essay. It was raw and brilliant, a story of loss, yes, but also of refusal, of the decision to matter no matter who tries to erase you. As I read her words, I felt something inside me settle, a sense that the story, finally, was bigger than my own life, that I had become the woman I needed as a girl. Later that spring, Mariah called to say she'd been accepted to a scholarship program at a local college. She said, "I want to study social work. I want to help girls like us." I cried when I hung up, not out of sadness, but relief. For years, I'd believed my life's meaning depended on repairing what was broken behind me. Now I saw that it was just as much about what could grow in the space I'd cleared. Mark and I took a weekend trip to the coast, renting a tiny cottage near the dunes. We walked the empty beaches, talked about the future, and sat long into the night listening to the ocean. There was no talk of marriage, no grand plans, just the quiet agreement that we would continue, together, and the life we were making. I told him I might want to foster a teenager someday. He said he'd stand beside me wherever that path led. Rachel hosted a gathering at her house for our writing group, inviting the women and girls whose stories had shaped the past year. We read aloud, cooked together, filled the small rooms with a noise that felt like home. Julia came too, bringing with her the warmth and laughter I remembered from childhood, tempered by the humility of someone who had learned, finally, to take responsibility for herself. She had started her new job at the shelter, teaching painting to women who'd lost more than I could imagine, and the work had changed her. At the end of the night, Julia pulled me aside. She handed me a letter, unsealed, written in her own careful hand. She said, "For whenever you need it, not because you owe me or I owe you, but because I want you to know what you've given me." The letter was simple. She thanked me for letting her fail, for stepping back when it would have been easier to rescue her. She thanked me for holding her accountable, for refusing to pretend the past was something else. "You taught me how to be strong for myself. You gave me the gift of truth," she wrote. It was the closure I hadn't known I needed. That summer, as our nonprofit gained traction, I spoke at a conference on family estrangement and women's financial security. I told the audience, "We are not just survivors of other people's stories. We are the authors of our own lives." It felt radical saying it out loud. It felt true. Back home, I sat on my fire escape with a cup of tea watching the city shimmer in the heat. The painting Julia had given me caught the light, and for a moment I saw myself not as the girl who'd been left behind, but as the woman who had chosen, again and again, to begin. If you are reading this and still waiting for someone to give you permission, stop waiting. Take up space. Write your story. Become the person you needed. This is your ending and your beginning. There's a certain hush that settles over Boston at the height of summer, when the city seems to pause and hold its breath. I noticed it one July evening as I walked home along the river, a breeze lifting the scent of cut grass, street lamps flickering on as dusk washed over the skyline. The world felt suspended, perfectly balanced, a moment before something new begins. I realized, with something like wonder, that for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was no debt looming, no old betrayal stalking my dreams. There was only this, my life, unfolding. A year had passed since Mariah's scholarship call. Our nonprofit had expanded, 2 new writing circles, a financial literacy workshop, a small but steady stream of success stories that reminded me again and again that beginnings are never wasted, even when they don't lead where you hoped. Sometimes the girls sent me photos, first apartments, job acceptance letters, poems published in college journals. I kept each one in a folder labeled proof. Not proof for the world, proof for myself that what I'd built from broken things could last. One humid afternoon, I was invited to speak at a national conference for women's rights in New York. I almost said no. Public speaking still made my hands tremble, the old fear of taking up too much space never fully gone, but Mark urged me to accept. Your story matters, he said, holding my gaze. But more than that, your voice matters now. I wrote my speech late at night, sitting at the small desk in my apartment, the window cracked to let in city sounds. I wanted to find the right words, not to tell a story of loss, but of reclamation. The day of the event, I stood in a bright, echoing hall, looking out over hundreds of faces, and began, "My name is Allison Moore. For most of my life, I believed survival meant silence. I thought if I worked hard enough, proved myself useful, maybe someone would choose me, see me, let me stay. But the truth is, survival is not enough. What we inherit is not always money or houses. It's the story we're given and the power to change it. I lost everything once, my family, my home, the future I'd counted on. I was written out of the story before I was old enough to have a say. But I learned, eventually, that the story doesn't end until you claim it. I built a new home, a new family out of truth and stubborn hope. I taught myself and others that you don't have to accept the roles you're handed. You can write your own. Afterward, women crowded around to talk, to share their own stories, to thank me. One mother, tears streaking her cheeks, whispered that she would help her daughter apply to college, even if her ex-husband threatened to cut them off. A young lawyer told me she used my book to advocate for a client disinherited by her adoptive parents. Each story was a reminder my voice was no longer just for myself. Back in Boston, I celebrated quietly. Rachel brought a cake to the apartment, Mark made a toast, Julia sent a hand-drawn card, a bouquet of wildflowers, each one named for a woman who'd rebuilt her life. I felt surrounded, at last, by a family of my own choosing. That weekend, Mariah came by, waving her college ID and a battered copy of my book. "You really did it, Allison," she grinned. "You didn't just survive, you lived." We sat on the stoop, feet bare, eating strawberries and talking about the fall semester. She asked if she could join the nonprofit as a mentor. "There's this girl in my dorm. She's like me, angry all the time, but smart as hell. I think I can help her." I smiled. That's all I ever wanted. For you to know you could be more than what was done to you. As the sun set, I took a photo. Mariah laughing, head thrown back, the city glowing behind her. Proof. Later, as the world grew quiet and the lights in the windows flickered out one by one, I stood at the window and let myself feel the full weight of this ending. It wasn't perfect. There were still regrets and old ghosts that visited sometimes in dreams. But I was here, whole. I chose every step of this life, even when it cost me everything I'd once thought I needed. I wrote one last letter, sealing it and slipping it into the folder marked Proof. It was addressed to the girl I used to be. You did not disappear. You did not fail. You learned to want. You learned to say no and then yes. You built a life. You mattered all along. If you are listening now, if you are waiting for someone to see you, to rescue you, to grant you a place, hear me. You are already enough. Your voice, your story, your ending are yours to claim. Don't just survive. Live. Begin. Again and again until your life is your own.